welcome back to my channel. Today I have a very interesting true crime case for you guys, and this is one of the most popular cases in US history. So it's taken me a long time to do research on it, and I'm very excited to get into it. It's probably gonna be a long video, but before we get started, today net neutrality was repealed by the FCC. And if you have not heard me talk about it, you should follow me on Twitter because I talk about it almost every day. I've done 2 videos on it. If you don't know what it is, I'll link them below if you want to watch it. But this is so important, you guys, especially to channels like mine. This is the beginning of censorship. It is so vitally important. This is not a right or a left wing issue. This is an everyone issue. This is the people against control, and everyone needs to step up. It is not over yet. The FCC now has to take this vote to Congress for them to vote on it. So it is now more important than ever to contact your representatives and tell them to save net neutrality. I will leave ways to do that as well as petitions below, but I just wanted to say that before we get started. I cannot say enough how important this is, especially to people who use the internet every day or their job is to be on the internet. And I really encourage you guys to ask your favorite content creators to talk about the issue on their channel or their platform. It's so important we get the word out, and the more people that speak and fight back against this, the better. So anyway, let's get into our video. So today we are going to be talking about the case of the West Memphis 3, and this is one of the most famous cases of all time. It's got a ton of publicity, and it happened back in 1993, but it has stayed relevant even to this day because the people who were convicted of the crime, there's 3 guys that were convicted of this crime, have now been found to be innocent or at least not guilty. So there's so much controversy. There's so many people that think they did it, and there's so many people that think they didn't do it and someone else did it. And if you're confused, I'll explain it all. There's so much anger and hostility over this case on the internet. It's insane. I want to make it clear that I have no opinion when it comes to this. I am truly, I don't know, it could have been anybody. I am truly at the point of I don't know. I would just encourage people who have differing opinions in the comments to please be respectful when doing so, and remember that at the end of the day, this case is about 3 children, young children who were murdered. And the important thing is to figure out who did it, not to fight with each other over who didn't do it. So I just wanted to say that. So our story today takes place in 1993 in West Memphis, Arkansas. This was a very small town area right in the Bible Belt, so very conservative community, Christian community mainly. Yeah, this was a very strange thing to happen in that area, and it really shook the community. And there were 3 boys involved in this case. The first victim is Steve Edward Branch, born on November 26th of 1984. And then there was Christopher Mark Byers, who was born on June 23rd of 1984, and James Michael Moore, who was also born in summer of 84 on July 27th. And all 3 of these boys died on May 5th of 1993. So let's go to that day. So these 3 boys were Cub Scouts. I believe they were in about the 2nd grade, and they were best friends. And this community was considered relatively safe, so they were able to just go play, and one of their favorite places to play was somewhere called Robin Hood Hills, and that's where they went to go play that day. Now, there's so much confusion about what happened that night, the timeline. There's so many different witnesses and different stories that people have that no one has been able to fully piece together when exactly this all happened. The boys were last seen around 6:30 p.m. and they believe that the crime was committed between about then and about 8 p.m. So the boys never came back that night, and all their families freaked out. They were already searching the area. Absolute panic. I mean, as anyone would be when it's after dark and your kids still haven't turned up and no one can find them, no one knows where they are. Obviously you'd be very panicked, so they called the police. Obviously police came, they started doing a search. They didn't really get the search, like a real search, going until the next day. As anyone can imagine, it was just agony for this community to not know where these boys were.
Give me your name. I forgot.
My name's Mark Byers.
Okay. Has your son, has this ever happened before?
None of the boys have ever gone off anywhere. None of the 3 have ever been missing or taken off ever before.
What's going through your mind as a parent?
I'm scared to death. That's, plain and simple. I'm scared for the safety and welfare of all 3 boys.
And on May 6th, the following day, after doing a full search, a parole officer actually named Steve Jones was looking in this area, and in the area of Robin Hood Hills, and he saw a sneaker, and it looked like a young boy's sneaker. So he went in there into the actual creek where the sneaker was floating, and when he put his foot down, he actually got kind of caught on one of the bodies. He couldn't get his foot back out of the water, and that is when the bodies were found. All three of the boys were found. There's actual video of this. I'm not gonna insert it. I don't ever put in videos or pictures of dead people in my videos. I think it's so disrespectful, but there is video of it. In fact, there's several movies made about this. This is one of the most popular cases in Hollywood, actually. If you've ever heard of the movies Paradise Lost, there's 3 Paradise Lost movies that were all based on this case. And in the beginning, like literally the first 30 seconds of the Paradise Lost movie, you see all 3 of these boys' bodies. And I just have to warn people out there, because you know, if you end up watching those movies because of this, I don't want people to be triggered. It was very upsetting for me. Like, I had some nightmares over it. So just wanted to warn you guys about that.
Michael Moore was found in this area right here at the bottom of the screen. Steve Branch was found just behind where these trees are in the stream. And Christopher Byers was found just below that body right here.
So these boys were all naked and hogtied, like I said, with their shoelaces. And there's very sad footage of one of the moms actually finding the news about her son.
From the moment they told me Stephen was dead, I really lost all touch of reality.
So their clothes were found scattered around the creek. One of the boys, Chris Byers, actually had the worst, I think, of the injuries, the visible injuries. He actually had issues in his groin area, which I will let you look that up on your own if you want to know more. It is very graphic and upsetting, so I'm not going to talk about that here, but he had damage to his genitals, and it was very scary. He also had several lacerations and wounds all over his body. The autopsies actually found that Chris Byers died from knife injuries, but the other 2 boys actually died from drowning. They did luminol tests on the ground and figured out that they were likely killed in that spot, and there weren't really like any drag marks in the grass in the area around it or anything to indicate the boys were taken to that area. They really believe that they were already in this area when they were attacked and murdered. All of these boys were tied up. Immediately the police thought there was more than one killer because the knots were tied differently for each boy, and it indicates that maybe there were multiple people involved. And also, to have 3 boys not be able to escape, you know, if you're just doing this on your own, it would be a lot harder because one of them could run away and get help or scream. Like, I think it would have been a difficult thing to do by yourself, although it could have been done. A lot of people think there were multiple individuals involved in the killing. So with the way that this looked, the rumors started flying immediately that this was some type of satanic killing because of the messing of the genitals. Like, that's a thing done in satanic rituals, I guess, and there were already actually rumors about satanic rituals going on in these woods. So people, I mean, that just spread like wildfire, when in reality there isn't any 100% solid evidence that this was anything satanic. It could have just been a serial killer, or I mean, who really knows?
Can you get it in there?
Oh God, why did you let this happen? Please help us through it. God, please help us through this.
It's not like they found any like symbols or markings or like anything ritualistic in the area. It was just based off of the info that there, you know, was this genital mutilation. So people in the community were obviously very, very freaked out, and when the idea of satanic rituals started and people started talking about this, people started coming forward with names of people they think could have done something satanic. Now in this video, I'm going to be giving a lot more unbiased information than the documentaries did, because these documentaries were done with the idea that the 3 that were convicted were not guilty, and I think they casually glazed over a lot of information that people deserve to know before making their own conclusion. Someone came forward to the police and mentioned the name Damien Echols. He was a guy in the community that had definitely fit the satanic you know, persona, dressed in black, was into certain music, kind of a dark individual. And I'm sure everyone knows someone like this. Like I know people like this that I love. They're not evil humans. And Satanism is really misunderstood. I'm not a Satanist and I really cannot explain it or understand it super well, but I do think it's very misunderstood. I've watched a documentary by Lisa Ling. She has an amazing journey of her exploring satanic rituals and Satanism, and it was shocking. I mean, it's definitely weird. I see why people get scared of it, and some of it I think can be very dicey and strange, but there are people that consider themselves Satanists that are definitely good people. So you can't like assume everyone that is in this kind of lifestyle is an evil person. But obviously, since people thought this was something satanic, and there's this guy, Damien, who fit the mold pretty damn well, and we're in this Christian community, this God-fearing community, that a Satanist is very scary to them, and he was automatically kind of pinned as the first suspect. But what the documentary left out that I noticed was they acted like the police randomly just picked them because of rumors. That was all rumor based and everything, but it actually wasn't. What really made the police bring Damien Echols in and what made them consider him a major suspect was actually an eyewitness call. So Damien had a girlfriend named Damini Tier. Her aunt actually was named Narlene Hollingsworth, and Narlene actually called the West Memphis police and actually reported seeing Damien Echols near the crime scene at around 9 p.m. and that he was covered in mud. Now this obviously could be hearsay. It could have been someone saying these things because maybe the aunt didn't like him. I mean, who knows? But the police had to take this into consideration, and I just thought it was so lame how all the movies I watched on this completely glossed over it and just act like the police were this giant bias. I mean, don't get me wrong, I thought the police sucked in this whole thing. Just sucked from the standpoint of lack of preservation of evidence and just bad practices. But I really do think they had every right to question Damien Echols with this witness statement and with his, you know, whole persona and character fitting this. And not only that, in the Innocence campaign and, you know, documentaries they've worked on kind of leave this out, but Damien had a very severe history of mental illness. Like, this has been so downplayed. I think people do not know how bad this was for him, and I'm not saying this is enough to convict him because it certainly is not, and I still think that he never should have been convicted in the first place, and I'll explain everything. But he was very, very mentally ill. He even felt he was so mentally ill that he could not work, and he filed for disability himself. And when he applied for Social Security disability, he explained that he had all these psychiatric issues, and he actually described himself as homicidal, suicidal, manic depressive, schizophrenic, and sociopathic. He really did have an extensive mental health record. It's 500 pages long, and in 1992 he was actually sent to a psychiatric hospital by a court order. His parents had actually expressed concern previously in his involvement in witchcraft and devil worship. And he actually did have a record in school of being violent, threatening teachers and other students. And one thing that people who believe that these three are innocent love to bring up is, and this is weird, that he did like to ingest blood. There was a specific instance in which he was in detention and another kid cut his wrist, and Damien grabbed his wrist and started sucking his blood. Now, I'm not saying that any of this proves that he killed those boys. There is not enough evidence to prove that he did it or he had any involvement in it. But it is interesting to note. I thought it was interesting that these documentaries completely leave it out. It's almost like they don't really want you to know about that. So it's just interesting to note. And Damien had tons of tattoos, and one of them specifically had the words evil put on his knuckles, which just didn't help in his case. Now, what's also interesting to note about Damien is that when he was brought into the police, he had this really intense, cocky attitude about the whole thing. I don't know if he was just being a smartass because he just was so angry at society and had all this anger, or if he really did have something to do with it. He was brought into the police. He said that he was home at the time of the murders. His alibi never held up in court. It's been highly scrutinized. He claimed that he had talked to all of these different girlfriends on the phone that night, but when they were interviewed, and even though they were never brought to the stand, some of them denied ever talking on the phone with him at this time. It was really weird because when he sat down with the police, they started interviewing him, and the police actually asked him how he thought the person who committed these murders would have felt during it. And Damien stated that the person probably felt good about what they had done and felt good that he had the power to do what he had done. Damien also stated that he figured the killer knew the kids went into the woods and even asked them to come out to the woods. He stated that the boys were not big, not smart, and they would have been easy to control. He also felt the killer would not have been too worried about the boys screaming due to the fact that it was in the woods and close to the expressway. Now, it does seem really weird, but I have to say, playing, the other side, I am trying to be as unbiased in this whole case as I can. I definitely would have been able to say those exact same things. In fact, if there was like a murder in my area and the police interviewed me for whatever reason, I probably would have said the same thing because I'm super into this. I feel like I can understand a killer's mind, as weird as that sounds, because I've been researching this stuff for years. Like, I'm so into it, and he was also really into this type of stuff, and you cannot judge what people are into. Like, that's not enough proof to say they murdered someone. Even in court, they brought up that he, read Stephen King books, which are classic novels. They certainly don't prove someone's a killer. And when they asked Damien's grandma where he was at this time, since they were not able to confirm where he was based on these phone calls, there was no proof that he was actually on these calls, his grandma said that he was out at around 8 p.m. from the best of her memory. I can definitely see how the police started to think it was him. But I do think that even though Damien was an interesting suspect for them, the police decided way too soon that he was guilty. They decided he probably did this from the beginning, and so much of their work after that was just so biased. I feel like that was a huge mistake because there are a couple other people that I think definitely had the possibility of being involved in this that were really not looked into because there was so much pressure from the community to get this solved. I mean, people were freaked the fuck out. I think they did a terrible job of looking into all other possibilities. They had it so made up in their mind that he did it, and along with his two other friends, which I haven't even gotten to yet. You're probably wondering, like, why is it the West Memphis 3? There was actually 3 guys that were convicted of these murders. The guys that were convicted of these murders were named Jesse Miskelly, Damien Echols, and Jason Baldwin. Jesse Miskelly is the main reason these boys ever got convicted of this. So these guys were friends. There was no proof that they were together that night. And the thing with Jesse Miskelly that people bring up and the films brought up is that he had a very low IQ. If you are familiar with the Stephen Avery case, it's similar to how the police interviewed someone who was almost mentally challenged. Jason Miskelly had so many different stories when he was interviewed by police. I mean, his story was all over the place. The timeline, everything, and if you are not aware of how much police are able to coerce people into confessions, this kind of stuff happens all the time. They continue to say things in a way that would almost give you the words like, here, do you think it was done with a knife? And if they said, oh, it might have been a gun, they'd be like, are you sure it wasn't a knife? They kind of talk people into confessing things, especially people who have been interrogated for hours, who are exhausted, who are confused, who think that the only way to get out of there is to start speaking about stuff. And there's a lot of people that think Jesse Miskelly started just making stuff up, because on June 3rd, he confessed some crazy stuff.
What occurred while you were there?
When I was there, I saw Damien hit this one boy real bad. Then he started screwing him and stuff.
All right, you've got in front of you a picture that was taken out of the newspaper, I believe. It's got 3 boys, and these are the 3 boys that were killed on that date in Robin Hood Woods. Which one of those 3 boys is it you say Damien hit? The 3rd picture, which will be
this boy right here?
Yeah.
All right, that's the Byers boy.
Christopher.
That's who you're pointing at?
So you saw Damien strike Chris Byers in the head.
Right.
What did he hit him with?
He hit him with his fist and bruised him all up real bad. Jason turned around and hit Steve Branch.
Okay.
And he started doing the same thing. Then the other one took off. Michael Moore took off running. So I chased him and grabbed him and held him till they got there, and then I left.
Inspector Gitchell, let's talk about the things that Jesse told you that are just absolutely incorrect. Now, on page 9 of his statement, Inspector Gitchell, Jesse says that the murders took place around noon. How did you know that was incorrect?
because the young boys were still in school.
Did at any time when he was telling you these things that you knew were incorrect, did it ever occur to you that what he was telling you was false? His entire story was false?
In Jesse's case, I feel like he did tell us a good bit of the truth, but then they also lessen their activity in a statement. That's just common, at least in my 20 years career.
Is it common for the police to simply ignore these big, obvious problems and just assume that everything else that he's telling you has got to be correct?
Jesse simply got confused.
And June 3rd was actually the first day they really started interviewing him, and it only took a few hours, surprisingly, till he said all this. So that's what's been the biggest wrench in all this for me, is his confession is bizarre. And yes, there's a lot of proof that he should have had this stuff explained to him better, that he possibly could have been the type to be coerced because he had such a low IQ. It was like almost to the point, I mean, he dropped out of school, like he really was not there fully mentally, and people like say he should not have been taken so seriously. And later he did recant his confession, but he confessed. He said that at one point one of the boys ran away and he got them and tied them up, and he basically watched while Jason Baldwin and Damien Echols actually did the murder. And I think the documentaries did a bad job of really explaining the truth about this, because he didn't just confess this one time. He confessed this several times and changed his story very often. He was actually given a polygraph test. His father said that he could do it, gave the permission, and he failed the polygraph test. Now please do not think that I am trying to say that these guys didn't do it, because I 100% do not have any theory of who did this. I actually have some other people that I think when I start telling you about their stories, you're gonna be like, oh, well, they possibly could have done it too. I still believe that there's not enough evidence to convict these guys of doing this. There was no DNA found at the crime scene of them. No, I mean, there's literally nothing to connect them to the crime scene. Zero, zilch, nothing. Not a hair follicle, not a shoe mark, not like nothing. So Jesse Misskelley said that he was scared of the police during the investigation and felt coerced to give his confession, and recanted the whole confession. And the interesting thing is Jesse Misskelley actually had a pretty strong alibi. The other two guys had zero alibi, nothing strong to protect them. But Jesse actually did have a pretty strong alibi. He was actually in a neighboring town at a wrestling match of some sort, and there are many witnesses who saw him there that night and have confirmed his alibi. And when you do read the court transcript of the police interrogation, there's so much proof that they were trying to coach this out of him, and I definitely think he could have possibly just made this all up. Maybe he just got carried away with this story, or God knows, maybe he actually in his head thought he did it, but this alibi shows that he wasn't even anywhere near this area that night. They were totally asking him like loaded questions, guiding him in the right way. He had so much inconsistency. It was almost impossible to use his confession because there was just so many things that were just proven to be false. Like he would just say things that just weren't true. And what's interesting is since he confessed and said the other two boys did this with him, he is the main thing that connects these other two boys to this crime scene. His false confession that he said he just made up is the main thing that connects the rest of them. It's crazy. So that following August, actually August 4th, the boys all pleaded not guilty to this case.
I think this case was never about justice because they knew we didn't do this. Fogelman knew we did not do this.
In these trials, multiple people confessed to lying on the stand. In particular, there was one guy who was in jail with Misskelley and made up this whole story that he confessed to it to him and told him how he did it and like did all these disgusting things, and he testified to this, you know, fellow inmate.
He told me how he dismembered the kid, he sucked the blood from. I remember not knowing why I was doing what I was doing. I remember it actually going through my head. I would have this massive illusion in my head and swear to God it was real. I mean, I could understand why he would never want to see me again or talk to me again, but I'm just telling him right now that I'm sorry.
He wanted attention, maybe he wanted to be on TV, or he confessed that I was on drugs and I just made the whole thing up.
I'm a drug addict. I was doing a lot of inhalants, LSD. I was huffing gas all the time. It's bad. It takes your whole perspective on life and makes it a dream.
There was actually other people who said things on the stand that later said they weren't true. Now, the thing about this case that I think a lot of people don't understand is there is no proof, 100% proof, that this was anything satanic. This definitely could have just been a random murder, a serial killer, someone else that got away with this. Because there were these turtles in the creek where they were found that are known for biting flesh. And the marks that these turtles leave on flesh looked exactly like the marks that were left on these boys.
Just keep going. This is the bite mark I'm looking for.
You can already start to see the outline of the jaw.
It's very possible they were just killed originally, and then the additional attacks, the damage to the groin area, all of that were turtles, you know, getting at their dead bodies, not realizing they were humans and biting them. So that's been, you know, really up in the air as well too, that we don't really know that this was anything satanic.
You asked me the single greatest offense committed in this case is what was done by John Fogelman with the knife in the leg.
What's really interesting as well is there was a knife that was found behind Jason Baldwin's trailer park in this like pond.
Fogelman had divers search a small lake behind the trailer park where Baldwin lived. That search produced a knife.
There's a lot of sketchiness around this whole knife.
We interviewed and have the declaration of the dive. He said that he was given a description of the knife and where it would be located. The press said they were told, and we have the reporter, come to the lake, we are about to make a discovery. The prosecution knew the knife was in the lake.
So there was, I think, plenty of inconsistency, and if I were a juror, I never would have convicted these guys of this crime. There's just not enough to connect them to the crime. There's weird behavior, there's mental illness, there's all these other things, but there's not enough evidence, not enough solid evidence to prove that they did this. And they were sentenced, and Jason and Jesse were sentenced to life in prison, but Damien Echols was sentenced to death.
We, the jury, find Damien Echols guilty of capital murder in the death of Stevie Branch, guilty of capital murder in the death of Chris Byers, guilty of capital murder in the death of Michael Moore.
Jesse Miss Kelly was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Michael Moore and 40 years for the murders of Stephen Branch and Christopher Byers.
We, the jury, have determined that Jason Baldwin shall be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole.
That they burn in hell. They want to worship the devil, then let them meet him, and I hope they do soon.
We, the jury, have determined that Damien Echols shall be sentenced to death by lethal injection.
And I think that's shocking considering the lack of evidence that he did this. And this case got really, really famous. Tons of famous celebrities, Eddie Vedder, Johnny Depp, Peter Jackson, people started speaking out against it. This is when Paradise Lost was created, the 3 movies. There was concerts, benefits, celebrities were speaking out about this, and people really backed them up.
People from all over the world, and that would be you and the people next to you right now, coming together to make some real justice happen.
I would like to read something to you guys. I can't remember what it's like to walk as a human being anymore. It's been well over 16 years since I've actually walked anywhere. There are times when I've thought, surely someone is going to put a stop to this. It does no good to dwell on it. I conserve my energy and apply it to small things I can change.
Each small thing connects to make a great big thing, and that big thing is to bring those boys back home.
Come gather around, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept that it's soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, come senators, congressmen, please heed the call.
And basically their argument is that they were assumed to have done this crime because of their lifestyle and who they are. And you know, there's thousands and thousands of people that kind of live this alternative lifestyle and like to dress in black and like, you know, to do things or be Satanists or be punk or gothic, whatever you want to call it, but none of that has any proof that someone committed a murder. And honestly, when I read a lot of counter arguments for why they are guilty, people bring up these satanic things, that he was dark, it proves it because he was, you know, into the devil shit, and he was into this and that, and he had these tattoos. And To me, none of that holds up as real evidence. That's all really flimsy hearsay and rumors. There was so much rumors, so much gossip. In 1996, they were first denied for the first time. And in the summer of 1996, the movie started coming out, so there's a lot more public support, and this really became a crowd-funded mission to get these guys out of jail. And they were refused over and over again for years. I mean, 1997 they tried again. In 1999 they were denied again. Now, let me tell you about some of the other possibilities for who could have done this crime before we just decide that it was them. First of all, Mark Byers. And a few years after this had all happened, his wife, who was on the TV all the time, everyone saw her, randomly died of unknown causes. She showed up at the hospital, the doctors were never able to figure it out, and nobody knows what happened. So I think that definitely makes him look a little bit sketchy. And this is really strange, but there were bite marks on one of the bodies, and Mark Byers, got his teeth removed and replaced. So he has a completely different jawline now. So it's very possible he got that changed just in case he was ever brought forward as a suspect. And this is where people are angry, is the police did such a shit job of looking into all these other options. There's a lot more about him. I'm linking tons of sources because I can't go into everything, but one person I really think could have done this is Terry Hobbs. He was the stepfather of Stevie Branch, and he has quite the history of aggression and abuse.
The accused teenagers, and it became undeniable that the brutal murders had been part of a satanic ritual. Back with us today, Pam and Terry Hobbs. I mean, all murder is horrible. Is the manner of the specific manner in which he died, is that something that will always haunt you?
Yeah, I'll go to my grave with it, thinking about it. I realize my son.
I think this is actually one of the reasons why these guys were definitely given another trial, is because they later in 2007 they found evidence, DNA evidence, that linked Terry Hobbs to the crime scene. There was a hair found in one of the shoelaces, like a hair tied in there, which tied up the boys. I can't remember if it was an investigator or a journalist, but someone went to Terry Hobbs' house to talk to him about all this, and they grabbed one of his cigarette butts. And they were able to do DNA testing and matched him to that sample. So there's DNA evidence that he was at the crime, while there's zero DNA evidence that Jason, Jesse, and Damien were at the crime. Zero. But there's evidence that Terry Hobbs was. Not only that, but Terry Hobbs was the last person to be seen with these boys. After interviewing the family of Stevie Branch, Stevie was absolutely terrified of this guy, Terry. Hated his stepfather, was very afraid of him, and Stevie's sister was also afraid of him. And now she's really fucked up. She's on drugs, believes she may have been molested by him. She says she has no memory of her childhood, and there's all these blank spots, and she thinks she was traumatized and literally blanked out those moments.
Attached here too is Exhibit 1, pages from Amanda Hobbs's journal in her handwriting. You know, I think I'm the only 19-year-old that can't remember what happened in my life 10 years ago. Was I traumatized as a child that I had to turn to drugs to forget about it? I used to tell my mom my dad messed with me.
But he used to buckle, and it left a welt probably that thick across the whole back, and it was purple.
I know Stevie asked me about 2 weeks before was murdered to leave Terry, and I asked him why, and he said he loves Amanda, but he don't love me.
I feel like I'm putting the pieces of a puzzle together, and I'm so scared.
And this is probably the most damning evidence of all. There's a woman named Mildred French who knew Terry Hobbs and lived near him. Terry went into this woman's house while she was taking a bath, unannounced, broke into her house, went into her bathroom. She quickly got out of the bathtub, was like, "What are you doing in my house?" And he started trying to shush her, and then he grabbed her breast, started screaming at him. He tried to get her to keep quiet, and when she wouldn't, he ran. The police were called. Not only that, but he also had passed aggravated assault against his brother. So this guy has a history of violence and aggression. He had said multiple times that he was angry with his wife. He would beat her, he backhanded her a few times, and he would do this because he was angry that Stevie would get more attention than he did, that her kids were getting more attention than she gave him. Even reports of him holding Stevie by his hair, hold it above ground, hold it and beating him. I mean, this guy is like clearly violent. Stevie was afraid of him, and he was the last one seen with him, and his DNA was found at the crime scene. I mean, to me, it's like, come on, like, there's no way he could be ruled out, at least. Definitely not ruled out. Chris Byers, who was also considered a suspect, like I said, you know, he's the one who removed his teeth. He even said outside of the courtroom, he called Terry Hobbs a baby killer.
What makes you so sure it's Hobbs? What makes you so sure that it's Terry Hobbs?
Pardon me?
What makes you so sure that it's Terry Hobbs? At least the real.
Well, his DNA was found there in the lace of Michael Moore. It didn't get there by osmosis. David Jacoby's hair was there. What did it do? Fly there on Harry Potter's wand? It either fell off of Terry Hobbs or he was there. There's no other two ways about it. None of the West Memphis Three's DNA was there.
Natalie Maines of the Dixie Chicks actually went after Terry Hobbs a few times. She started speaking about this whole thing. She really believed that the West Memphis Three were innocent. And Terry was so mad about this, he actually sued her, which she never ever implicated that he did it. She just spoke against, you know, the innocence and pointed out, you know, we need to look more into Terry. And he tried to sue her, and he thought he was gonna make like millions of dollars off of this, I guess. And he didn't get jack shit, he lost the lawsuit. But I think it's really interesting he was mad enough to sue her. So they kept trying. 2008, they were denied again for a trial. 2010, they were denied again. And then luckily on November 4th, the state Supreme Court unanimously ordered a new circuit court evidentiary hearing for Baldwin Echols and Miss Kelly. So they scheduled this hearing, and actually in a rare plea agreement, and this is the Alford Plea. If you watched my last video about James Earl Ray, the man who killed Martin Luther King, he was also confessed with an Alford plea. And this basically allows you to plead guilty to the crime while also maintaining your innocence.
It's really rare, bizarre, and nonsensical. What an Alford plea means is you're accepting a guilty plea and maintaining your innocence at the same time. The reason it exists is so that it sort of brings closure to a case, and it prevents the state from being held responsible for what they've done. They don't have to compensate you in any sort of way.
They were released.
Now we turn to the three men who are free tonight for the first time in 18 years, released after serving half their lives in an Arkansas prison. The men who came to be known as the West Memphis Three have always insisted they did not commit a brutal triple murder.
There's Damien Echols.
Nearly 2 decades after they were convicted of murdering 3 Boy Scouts, hog-tied and left in a ditch, and 4 years after ABC News first broke word of DNA evidence that could exonerate them, today the West Memphis Three walked free.
It's been an absolute living hell.
And since the trial, witnesses had changed their testimony amid claims that an initial confession was coerced. A new trial likely, an odd deal was struck. The men could tell the judge they were innocent, but prosecutors would only let them go free if they agreed to enter a guilty plea.
For guilty plea today? Guilty. I am pleading guilty.
Confusing some in the victims' families who now think the real murderer is at large.
But I'm still standing and fighting for justice because they're innocent. They did not kill my son.
Damien Echols had been in solitary confinement on death row for 10 years and was 3 weeks from execution back in 1994.
They decided that the time they'd already served in prison was enough, and they were set free. Now this caused a wave across the country of celebration, panic, confusion, sadness, I mean, just about everything. There's so many people that think that these three got off and got away with murder. There's a lot of people that really question the behavior of Damien Echols. I mean, I've seen an interview with him. He seemed like a nice guy to me, but I mean, I don't know who did this. I seriously think it could have been some random person that's unknown. I definitely don't think this had any real proof that this was satanic. I think Terry Hobbs is extremely sketchy, and Mark Byers is also sketchy. I mean, there's just not enough, no matter what you want to fight about, like, I've seen so many people argue they should have stayed in prison, there is not enough proof to have ever convicted these guys, period, end of discussion. I'm not saying they're innocent, but there's not enough to prove that they did it. And there's plenty of other reasons to think that it could have been one of these other suspects. I mean, just as much. I think there's just as much evidence on Terry Hobbs as there is on Damien Echols and, you know, Jesse and Jason. I think there's a lot of anger about this because at the end of the day, 3 boys were murdered. 3 8-year-old beautiful boys with bright futures ahead of them were murdered, and no one knows who did it. So naturally, when something like that happens, people want a solution. They want an end to this. They want to know who did it. They want someone to serve and to pay the consequence for this, and no one is doing that. So people are naturally feeling angry, and I think a lot of people really were happy that they were, you know, originally booked and convicted, because it gave them an end to this case. And now it's back to the point where no one knows what happened, and I think a lot of people are angry about that. Please don't make your decision on what you think happened based on a documentary or any certain biased source. I'm gonna leave some sources below. Some of them are definitely biased, but some of them aren't. And if you're really into this type of stuff, I really challenge you to look more into the case as a whole. There's so much information to go through. I'd love to hear your opinions in the comment section. Please do not attack each other for someone else's opinions. If someone thinks they're guilty, that's okay, that's their opinion. If someone thinks they're innocent, that's okay, that's their opinion. We do not need to attack each other. It adds so much more negativity and unnecessary confusion and fighting towards this. Just because you believe in something does not make it true. No one has any idea what truly happened. It's completely up in the air. I just want people to remember at the end of the day that even though there's so much to fight about and argue about, that 3 boys were murdered, 3 young boys were murdered. So much of this case is fogged over, like the boys have almost been forgotten about. But like I said, I do want to know your thoughts on this and any other information that you want to share in the comments with other people. Like I said, I couldn't get to everything today, but I did my best to kind of give a full overview of everything. But that's it for me today, guys. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.